I want you to imagine this for a moment. You're standing in a white dress surrounded by flowers, music, and smiling faces. Everyone believes you're about to step into the happiest chapter of your life. But what if I told you that within hours, the man you married and the woman you trusted more than anyone else would destroy everything you believed in? This isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about betrayal on a wedding night in a house full of love, silence, and lies. And the worst part? I didn't lose them. They lost me. My life felt like a dream come true, the kind of dream you're afraid to wake up from because everything feels exactly how you imagined it would. I was about to marry Julian, the man I had pictured for years as the father of my children, my life partner, my safest place in the world. The future felt secure, bright, and finally settled. Everything had been prepared with care. The flowers chosen one by one, the menu tested and retested, the music selected to match moments only Julian and I truly understood. Even the smallest details carried meaning. Standing in front of the mirror in my white gown, I remember thinking that happiness had finally found me. My mother stood behind me, her eyes full of tears, fixing my veil with trembling hands. She smiled at me with the kind of pride only a parent can feel. In that moment, I truly believed I had made it. I believed I was stepping into a life built on love, loyalty, and trust. What I didn't know was that this wedding wasn't the ending of a love story. It was the beginning of my greatest tragedy. From the start, I knew there was no way I could walk down that aisle without my best friend, Laura Jenkins, by my side. Laura wasn't just a friend. She was my soul sister, my confidant, the only person who knew every corner of my heart, every fear, every dream, every secret I had never said out loud. Choosing her as my maid of honor wasn't even a decision, it was a certainty. No one questioned it. Everyone knew how inseparable we were. She had been there through every heartbreak, every celebration, every version of me. That morning, she smiled as she helped me with my veil, adjusting it gently, making sure everything looked perfect. Her eyes were soft, her voice calm, her touch familiar. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't see then. That smile was a mask, and behind it, a secret was hiding, a secret powerful enough to ruin my life. From the start, we had chosen to have an intimate wedding far from the noise of the city. That's why we picked an elegant estate nestled in the hills of Virginia, surrounded by century-old trees and blooming gardens. The place felt magical. A stately stone manor, cozy rooms, and a grand hall with high ceilings and enormous windows that allowed warm sunlight to pour in. It felt like the perfect place to begin a forever. We had rented the entire estate for the weekend so our families and the wedding party could stay together. We didn't want just a ceremony, we wanted shared laughter, late-night conversations, and the feeling of togetherness. The night before the wedding, we all gathered on the patio for dinner. String lights glowed softly above us, wine glasses clinked, and gentle music played in the background. Julian seemed calm, affectionate even. Laura never left my side, just like she always had. No one suspected anything. No one sensed the storm quietly forming beneath all that peace. That night, I went to bed with my heart full. I replayed every moment of the day, smiling in the darkness, convinced that happiness had finally chosen me. I fell asleep imagining the moment I would walk toward Julian in my white dress, believing the hardest part of life was already behind me. I didn't know that everything I trusted was about to collapse. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, and I woke up with an excitement I hadn't felt since I was a child. My heart raced with anticipation. Laura was the first person to enter my room, carrying breakfast on a tray, smiling brightly. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt certain. I couldn't have known that nothing was real anymore. I took a deep breath as Laura set the tray down beside me, the smell of coffee and toast filling the room. She chatted softly about the schedule for the day, the hairstylist arriving soon, how everything was running perfectly. I smiled and nodded, feeling wrapped in a sense of calm I didn't question. Why would I? This was my wedding day. Nothing bad was supposed to happen today. When it was time, my father knocked gently on the door. His face lit up when he saw me standing there in my gown. He didn't say much, just offered his arm, his eyes already glassy with emotion. As we stepped outside, the garden unfolded in front of us like something straight out of a storybook. White petals covered the path. String instruments played softly in the background. Friends and family stood, smiling, some wiping tears from their eyes. The air felt warm and still, as if the world itself had paused to witness this moment. And there he was. Julian stood at the end of the aisle, waiting for me. His eyes glistened, his smile familiar and comforting, the same smile that had made me fall in love with him so many times before. My heart swelled as I walked toward him, holding back tears, convinced I was stepping into the most important and beautiful chapter of my life. I didn't know that every step I took was leading me closer to my greatest heartbreak. When the officiant asked if we accepted to join our lives together, I didn't hesitate. My voice trembled slightly as I said, "I do," but it was firm, honest. My eyes never left Julian's. I was filled with love, with certainty, with hope. He answered too, "I do." For just a split second, something flickered across his face. His smile dimmed, almost imperceptibly. I noticed it, but brushed it away. I told myself it was nerves. Everyone feels nervous on their wedding day, right? We kissed to the sound of applause. White flowers surrounded us. Tears of joy filled the air. In that moment, I believed everything was real. I believed our love had won. The celebration unfolded just as we had imagined, elegant and intimate. Tables glowed with candlelight under a star-filled sky. Soft music drifted through the evening as laughter and conversation filled the space. People hugged us, congratulated us, told us how perfect everything was. Julian moved through the crowd, smiling, talking, laughing. But every time his eyes met mine, there was something distant there, something guarded. I told myself he was tired. Wedding planning is exhausting. I chose not to let doubt ruin what was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. My father stood to give a toast, his voice shaking with emotion as he spoke about watching me grow, about the love he believed Julian and I shared. Everyone applauded. Julian raised his glass, smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. I searched his face for the warmth I knew so well, but found only silence. Still, I told myself I was overthinking. I had no reason not to trust him. When the celebration ended, we made our way up to the bridal suite. The room was warm and elegant, decorated with flowers and soft candlelight. This was supposed to be our first night as husband and wife, a moment we would remember forever. My heart raced as I closed the door behind us, wanting to stretch the moment, believing we were about to seal our love in the most intimate way. Julian didn't look at me. He took off his watch and placed it on the nightstand, removed his shoes slowly. He sighed deeply, like someone burdened by something heavy. I stepped toward him, smiling nervously, reaching out to wrap my arms around him. That's when he spoke. "I'm tired." His voice was flat, dry, almost annoyed. I froze. I waited for him to laugh, to turn around, to say something else. But he didn't. He unbuttoned his shirt without a word, walked past me, and lay down on the small twin bed in the corner of the room. He turned off the light and turned his back to me. No goodnight, no explanation, nothing. I stood there in the darkness, my wedding dress still on, my mind trying desperately to understand what had just happened. I sat on the edge of the bed we were supposed to share, feeling invisible on the most important night of my life. Minutes passed, then more. I waited for him to speak, to reach for me, to explain. All I heard was his quiet breathing from across the room. I laid down slowly, tears sliding silently down my face, careful not to make a sound. The room smelled of fresh flowers, but inside me, everything was withering. That was my first night as a wife. Alone, confused, and already breaking. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, wishing this was all a nightmare, wishing Julian would suddenly cross the room and pull me into his arms. But the silence stayed heavy, unbroken. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyes finally closed. And then, less than 30 minutes later, a sound jolted me awake. A muffled noise, a short, stifled groan. My heart began to race as I sat up in bed, confusion flooding my thoughts. I turned my head toward the twin bed. It was empty. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty bed, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the walls. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he'd gone to the bathroom. Maybe he needed air. Anything but what my body was already starting to fear. I slipped my feet onto the cold floor and stood up slowly, my wedding dress brushing softly against my legs. Another sound echoed through the silence, low, muffled, unmistakably human. It wasn't loud enough to be obvious, but it was clear enough to make my stomach tighten. I opened the door quietly and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dim, lit only by a faint light coming from a room at the far end. The house, so full of laughter and music just hours earlier, now felt hollow, almost unreal. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. The sound came again, a restrained groan, like someone trying not to be heard. I told myself to turn back, to go back to bed and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something inside me had already shifted. A cold instinct had taken over, pushing me forward, even as my heart begged me to stop. I moved slowly down the hallway, barefoot, careful not to make a sound. With every step, my chest felt tighter, my thoughts racing. Julian wasn't in our room, and whatever that sound was, it wasn't coming from the bathroom. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. The room at the end of the hallway belonged to Julian's mother. She had said earlier that night that she wasn't feeling well and needed to go into town to get some medicine. She hadn't come back. No one seemed worried. The room was supposed to be empty. So why was there light coming from inside? I stopped a few steps away from the door, my hands beginning to shake. My mind tried to reject the idea forming in my head. This didn't make sense. It couldn't. I had just gotten married. This was my wedding night. Another sound came from inside the room, softer now, more deliberate. My heart sank. I took one more step forward, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't want to imagine anything. I didn't want to put meaning to the sounds, but my body already knew before my mind could accept it. I stood right in front of the door that was supposed to be closed to the world that night, the door that should have been empty. My breath caught in my throat as I leaned closer, pressing my ear gently against the wood. At first, there was only silence. Then, a soft creak of a bed, a muffled sigh, and then, a woman's voice. I closed my eyes instantly, shaking my head as if that could erase what I'd just heard. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed my mind was betraying me. But I recognized the voice. I would have recognized it anywhere. It was Laura, my best friend, my maid of honor, my soul sister. Her voice came in broken whispers, mixed with soft laughs I had heard countless times during late-night talks and shared secrets. Those sounds, once comforting, now sliced straight through my chest. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak, my vision blurring. My body felt like it was shutting down, like I might collapse right there in the hallway. Every memory we had shared flashed through my mind all at once. Childhood laughter, promises of loyalty, tears wiped away in silence, all of it shattered in seconds. And then I heard him, Julian's voice, low, breathing hard, whispering her name. There was no room for doubt anymore, no space for denial. The man who had stood at the altar just hours earlier and promised me forever was now inside that room, sharing what he denied me with the person I trusted most in the world. The air felt thick. I couldn't breathe. My chest burned as tears streamed down my face, but I didn't make a sound. I pressed my forehead against the wall, shaking, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Every sound from behind that door felt like a dagger, every whisper, every movement, carving something out of me that I would never get back. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I didn't move. I stayed there. I don't know why, but something in me needed to see it with my own eyes, to hear the truth completely, to make sure this wasn't some cruel illusion. Time stopped existing. Seconds stretched into eternity. My heart beat wildly against my ribs, each thump reminding me that this was real. Then the door opened. Julian stepped out first. His shirt unbuttoned, his belt crooked, his hair disheveled as he ran a hand through it, clearly not expecting anyone to be there. When his eyes met mine, he froze. Guilt was written all over his face. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, caught between two worlds he had destroyed. Then Laura appeared behind him. Her hair was messy, her makeup smeared, her dress wrinkled, and she held her heels in her hand like she'd forgotten what they were for. When she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks, her face draining of color. No one spoke. We didn't need to. The truth stood between us, heavy and undeniable. And still, with my heart in pieces and my voice trembling, I asked the only question that mattered. Why? I stood there, blocking the doorway, my body tense, my hands shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. My heart felt like it was tearing itself apart inside my chest, but I forced myself to stay upright, to look at them, to not collapse in front of the two people who had just destroyed me. How could you do this? My voice came out broken, raw, barely louder than a whisper. How could you betray me like this on my wedding night? Neither of them answered at first. Julian looked everywhere but at me, his jaw tight, his breathing uneven. Laura stared at the floor, her shoulders hunched, as if making herself smaller could make her disappear. The silence was unbearable. It felt intentional, like they were waiting for me to move, to cry, to run away so they wouldn't have to explain themselves. But I didn't move. I stayed right there, forcing them to face what they had done. Julian finally spoke, his voice sharp and defensive, as if he were the one under attack. He said I was wrong. He said nothing had happened. He said he had only gone into the room to help Laura collect some things his mother had left behind. The lie was so clumsy, so poorly constructed, that it almost hurt more than the truth. I looked at him, stunned by the audacity. Did he really think I was that blind, that stupid? Laura still didn't say a word. She just stood there, staring at the floor, while Julian kept talking, stacking one excuse on top of another, each one more fragile than the last. He spoke quickly, nervously, as if speed could turn lies into truth. I felt something inside me snap. I told him I had heard everything. Every whisper, every groan, every sound they should never have shared. I told him he didn't need to explain anymore, that his silence had already said enough. For a moment, Julian's shoulders dropped. He closed his eyes as if exhausted, as if the effort of pretending had finally become too heavy. When he spoke again, his voice was low and flat. He admitted it. Not with remorse, not with shame, just with resignation. He said he had been confused for a while. As if confusion could excuse betrayal, as if confusion justified destroying 2 lives in one night. That was when Laura broke. She started crying uncontrollably, covering her face with her hands, repeating over and over that she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said she didn't know how things had gone so far. Her tears did nothing to me. They came too late. Words don't heal wounds like this. The person I had trusted with my life had stabbed me in the back without hesitation. In that moment, Laura wasn't my friend anymore. She wasn't even a stranger. She was a threat I had survived. I felt something inside me fracture completely. My legs trembled, my chest burned. Breathing felt like betrayal itself, as if even the air had turned against me. And then something unexpected happened. The tears stopped. There were no tears left to cry. Only a cold, dry rage settled deep inside me, quiet but consuming. My wedding had turned into a nightmare, and I knew in that moment that I would never be the same person again. I didn't scream. I didn't insult them. I didn't beg for answers. I simply turned around. I went back to the room that was supposed to be ours and began gathering my things. I didn't look at Julian. I didn't look at Laura. I didn't need to. Their guilt filled every corner of that house. Still wearing my wedding gown, I walked down the stairs alone. The estate was silent, asleep, unaware of the devastation that had just taken place within its walls. I stepped outside into the early morning air, barefoot, the cold biting into my skin. Fog hovered low over the garden, the same garden where hours earlier I had walked with hope in my heart. Now I just wanted to disappear. I walked across the grounds without a destination, my dress dragging through dirt and dew. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel my feet. I felt nothing but the echo of what I had heard, replaying over and over in my mind. I walked for hours, down empty roads, past fields and trees that didn't care about my pain. No cars passed, no one stopped, and in a strange way, I was grateful. I didn't want witnesses. I didn't want questions. I sat on a bench beside a dry field as dawn began to break. My body shook, whether from cold or shock I couldn't tell. I stared ahead, replaying every sound, every look, every lie. This was supposed to be the happiest night of my life. Instead, I was alone, broken, and lost. When the sky finally began to lighten, exhaustion pulled me back toward the estate. Not because I wanted to go back, but because something inside me needed closure. I couldn't leave without the truth being spoken. The house was quiet when I entered through the back door. It felt unfamiliar now, like I was an intruder in a place that had once held my dreams. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I wasn't going to stay silent. I followed the sound of voices into the dining room. Morning light filtered softly through the windows, touching plates of fruit, coffee mugs, half-eaten pastries. Laughter drifted through the air, casual and unaware. My parents were there, Julian's parents, members of the wedding party. Everyone sat together as if the world had not cracked open just hours earlier. They were talking about breakfast plans, about the weather, about how beautiful the ceremony had been. No one noticed me at first. I stood in the doorway, my wedding dress wrinkled and stained at the hem, my hair undone, my face pale and exhausted. I watched them for a moment, feeling a strange distance from the scene, like I was observing a life that no longer belonged to me. The normality of it all made something dark and steady rise inside my chest. I stepped forward and cleared my throat. The sound was small, but it cut through the room. One by one, conversations stopped, heads turned, smiles faded. My mother stood up instantly, her face changing the moment she saw me. "Are you okay?" she asked, already walking toward me. I raised my hand gently, asking her to stop. My voice surprised even me when I spoke. It was calm, firm, steadier than I felt inside. "I need everyone to gather in the living room," I said. "There's something I need to say." Confusion spread across their faces, but no one argued. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood and moved quietly, sensing that this wasn't about a small misunderstanding. As they took their seats, my eyes scanned the room. Julian wasn't there. Laura wasn't there either. Their absence spoke louder than anything I could have said. My parents noticed it too. I saw the unease settle into my father's expression, the worry tightening around my mother's eyes. I stood in front of them, my hands clasped together, my heart beating steadily now, as if it had already made peace with what needed to be done. I thanked them for being there, for celebrating with me what should have been the happiest day of my life. Then I told them the truth. I said I had discovered Julian and Laura together in his mother's room in the middle of the night. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize it. I stated it clearly, plainly, the way you deliver facts you wish didn't exist. Gasps filled the room. Murmurs followed. Someone covered their mouth. Someone else shook their head slowly in disbelief. I felt their shock ripple through the space, but my voice didn't falter. I said it had happened on my wedding night. I said I heard everything. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. My mother sat down slowly, her hand pressed to her chest. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the floor. Julian's parents didn't look at each other. His mother stared ahead, tears sliding silently down her face, while his father's shoulders slumped under the weight of shame. No one said it wasn't true. No one tried to defend them. Everyone in that room knew I wouldn't lie about something like this. I told them I would be annulling the marriage, that I wanted nothing more to do with Julian or Laura, that I wasn't asking for pity or advice or attempts at reconciliation. I was simply informing them of my decision. My father stood up and wrapped his arms around me without a word. His hug was strong, grounding, as if he was silently telling me that I had done nothing wrong, that he was proud of me. No one protested. No one stopped me. As I turned to leave, I heard Julian's mother begin to sob softly, her husband trying unsuccessfully to comfort her. My own parents' eyes were red, not just from sadness, but from the pain of knowing they couldn't protect me from this. I walked out of that room feeling like I was leaving behind more than a wedding. I was leaving behind an entire version of myself. I left the estate without looking back, carrying nothing but my dignity. The white dress clung to me, stained with dirt and tears, heavy with memories I no longer wanted. When I reached home, I didn't rest. I didn't cry. I contacted a lawyer immediately and filed for divorce. There was no hesitation, no waiting period, no room for second thoughts. I refused to see Julian. I refused to talk. The woman who had said "I do" no longer existed. Weeks later, I heard that Julian had moved in with Laura, as if their betrayal had been some grand love story finally set free. They walked through the world without shame, pretending nothing had been destroyed. But life has a way of returning what is given, not through revenge, through truth, and theirs didn't long to unravel. At first, people said Julian and Laura looked happy together. They showed up places hand in hand, as if they had stepped into a love that had simply been misunderstood. Some even dared to call it fate. I heard these things from a distance, through whispers and secondhand comments, and every time I did, I felt nothing. No jealousy, no anger, just a quiet confirmation that I had made the right decision by walking away. But what starts in betrayal rarely knows how to survive in truth. Only a few months passed before the cracks began to show. The same intensity that had pulled them together started turning against them. Their arguments became loud enough for neighbors to hear. Doors slammed, voices rose, the kind of chaos that follows people who mistake desire for love. Laura stopped smiling the way she used to. The confidence she once wore so easily disappeared, replaced by a constant tension in her face. Julian, on the other hand, grew distant again, spending more and more time away from home, just like he had with me. Patterns don't disappear, they repeat. And then, one day, Julian disappeared. He left Laura without warning, without explanation, without even the decency of a proper goodbye, just a short note and another lie. He had cheated on her with a younger woman, someone new, someone who didn't know his history or the destruction he carried with him. He hadn't changed, he had simply continued. Laura was left alone, surrounded by the ruins of choices she couldn't undo. The friends who once supported her turned away. My family never spoke to her again. The trust she had broken couldn't be rebuilt with apologies. For the first time, she understood what it meant to be completely alone. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance. Their lives no longer intersected with mine. What happened to them belonged to them. I chose a different path. I threw myself into my work, not as a distraction, but as a way to rebuild myself from the inside out. I focused on creating something solid, something that didn't depend on promises or people who could walk away. I invested in myself, my ideas, my growth. Slowly, the sadness loosened its grip. The constant ache softened into clarity. I discovered that I could be happy without leaning on anyone, that independence wasn't loneliness, it was strength. I opened a second store, then a third. In less than a year, my name began to circulate with respect. Customers trusted me, suppliers believed in me. Trade magazines started asking questions about the woman who had quietly built something real from nothing. But I wasn't chasing recognition, I was chasing peace. 3 years passed. My life became calm, stable, free of chaos. The memory of that night no longer hurt. It reminded me of how far I had come. Julian and Laura faded into the background of a story that no longer defined me. I learned to be alone without feeling empty. And then, when I wasn't looking for anything, life surprised me. I met him at a business meeting during a presentation with other entrepreneurs. His name was Daniel Jackson. He spoke with a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but earned it. He listened more than he talked. And when he spoke to me, he asked questions no one had ever asked before. I didn't feel butterflies. I felt calm. With Daniel, everything unfolded differently. There was no rush, no pressure, no dramatic declarations, just honest conversations and mutual respect. He didn't try to fill a void. He didn't try to save me. He walked beside me. I set the pace and he followed without complaint. Slowly, I began to look forward to his messages, to the sound of his voice, to the way he saw me, not as someone broken, but as someone whole. What grew between us wasn't passion fueled by chaos, it was peace. And that peace taught me what love was supposed to feel like. I didn't trust that peace at first. After everything I had been through, calm felt suspicious, like the quiet before another storm. I kept waiting for something to go wrong, for a lie to surface, for disappointment to sneak in through the cracks. But with Daniel, nothing ever did. He never rushed me, never questioned my boundaries, never asked me to explain the scars I carried. He understood without needing details. And in that understanding, something inside me slowly softened. We started spending more time together. Simple things, coffee after meetings, long walks where conversation flowed naturally without effort, silences that didn't feel awkward or heavy. He never tried to impress me with grand gestures or dramatic promises. He showed up, consistently, calmly, honestly. For the first time in my life, love didn't feel like something I had to earn or fight for. It felt safe. When we officially started dating, it happened quietly. No announcement, no rush. It simply felt right. The people around me noticed the change before I did. They said I looked lighter, more present, like someone who had finally stopped bracing for impact. With Daniel, I shared trips, projects, and moments that didn't need to be perfect to be meaningful. He didn't promise me a future filled with fantasies. He offered me a solid present. And after everything I had lived through, that meant more than any fairy tale ever could. I was happy. Not the loud, performative kind of happiness, the steady kind, the kind that doesn't need validation. And that's when the past tried to knock on my door again. One afternoon, I received a message from Julian. It was polite on the surface. He said he was glad to hear I was doing well, that he sometimes thought about what we had lost, that he wished me the best. But between the lines, I could feel it. Regret, bitterness, the discomfort of seeing someone you thought you had broken move on and thrive. I didn't reply. I owed him nothing. But Julian wasn't done. A few days later, without warning, he showed up at my store. I recognized him immediately, but he didn't look like the man I had once loved. He looked thinner, tired. His eyes were dull, as if life had drained something essential from him. His clothes hung loosely on his frame like he hadn't cared enough to notice. He asked for 5 minutes. Closure, he called it. I looked at him calmly. There was no anger, no sadness, just distance. I told him to speak quickly. I had work to do. He started talking about mistakes, about how confused he had been, about how he had lost me because he hadn't known how to appreciate what he had. His voice trembled as if he expected my heart to soften, as if the past could still reach me. I listened without interrupting, not because I cared, but because I was curious how far he would go. When he finished, I looked at him and told him the truth. I told him he no longer had any power over me, that what we had no longer existed, that he shouldn't confuse regret with love or think he could recover something he destroyed with his own choices. There was no yelling, no insults, no drama, just a firm, final refusal. Julian tried to smile, the way he used to, as if he still believed he could make me waver, but that smile meant nothing now. He looked like a stranger, smaller, irrelevant. I asked him to leave. As he turned away, I could see the frustration in his eyes, the disbelief, the realization that he had truly lost me forever. He muttered something about how quickly I had moved on, trying one last time to hurt me. It didn't work. He left. And this time, I was the one who closed the door. When silence returned, I sat at my desk and took a deep breath. Not in relief, not in triumph, but in peace. The kind that comes when you know a chapter has ended for good. A few minutes later, Daniel walked in, unaware of what had happened. He saw my face, walked over and hugged me without asking questions. He didn't need explanations. He just stayed. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. When Daniel hugged me, something settled inside my chest. Not excitement, not relief, just a deep sense of calm, like a door quietly closing behind me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't look for answers. He simply stayed, his presence steady, grounding, exactly what I needed without ever having to say it out loud. That's when I realized how different this love was. Daniel didn't come into my life to rescue me. He didn't arrive with dramatic speeches or promises to fix what someone else had broken. He met me whole, and he chose me that way. Not as a woman who had survived something tragic, but as a woman who knew her worth. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still long work days, difficult decisions, moments of fatigue, but there was no chaos, no fear of betrayal lurking in the background. Love became something that supported my life instead of consuming it. We built a routine that felt natural, mornings with shared coffee, evenings with quiet conversations, weekends that didn't need elaborate plans to feel meaningful. Sometimes we would sit together in silence, each doing our own thing, and that silence felt full instead of empty. I used to think love had to be intense to be real, that it had to hurt a little to matter. I learned the hard way how wrong that was. With Daniel, love felt like breathing. As my business continued to grow, so did my confidence. I expanded into new locations, hired people I trusted, and created a work environment built on respect. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for life to happen to me, I was shaping it. Sometimes, late at night, memories of the wedding would resurface. Not sharply, not painfully, just faint echoes of a woman I used to be. I didn't push them away, I let them pass through me, acknowledging them without letting them define me. Pain doesn't disappear completely, it transforms. I learned that betrayal doesn't just break you, it reveals you. It strips away illusions, false security, and the parts of yourself that accepted less than you deserved. And once those illusions are gone, you're free. People sometimes asked me how I managed to trust again, how I could open my heart after being humiliated so deeply. My answer was always the same. I didn't trust blindly anymore. I trusted wisely. Trust isn't about believing someone will never hurt you. It's about knowing you'll be okay, even if they do. It's about choosing people who show consistency instead of intensity, honesty instead of charm. Daniel never asked me to forget my past. He respected it. He understood that every scar told a story, and that those stories had shaped the woman standing in front of him. There was no competition with ghosts, no insecurity about where I had been. That alone was healing. One evening, as we sat on the terrace of my home, watching the sun slowly sink behind the buildings, Daniel reached for my hand. There was nothing dramatic about it, no speech, no declaration, just a simple gesture filled with presence. I realized then that peace doesn't sound like fireworks. It sounds like shared silence, like mutual respect, like knowing nothing is missing. My life no longer revolved around proving anything. I didn't need to show the world that I was happy. I simply was. And that quiet happiness felt stronger than anything I had ever known. Julian and Laura no longer crossed my mind, not because I had forgiven them, but because they no longer occupied space within me. They were part of a chapter that had closed, sealed by growth, not anger. I understood something important. My happy ending didn't come from finding the right person. It came from becoming the woman who would never accept the wrong one again. And once I became her, everything else fell into place. Sometimes people think healing is loud. They imagine strength as something dramatic, something you announce to the world. But the truth is, real healing is quiet. It happens in moments no one applauds, in choices no one sees, in the way you stop revisiting places that once broke you and start building spaces that protect you instead. I stopped asking myself why it happened. That question kept me trapped for too long. Why Julian betrayed me. Why Laura crossed a line she could never uncross. Why the people closest to me became the source of my deepest pain. None of those questions ever brought peace. They only kept the wound open. So I stopped asking why. I started asking who I wanted to become after it. That shift changed everything. I became more intentional with my time, more selective with the people I allowed close, and no longer confused familiarity with loyalty or history with safety. I learned that not everyone who walks beside you is meant to walk with you forever, and that's okay. The version of me who stood at the altar believed love meant endurance, believed loyalty meant staying even when something felt wrong. She thought strength was silence. She thought dignity meant swallowing pain. She was wrong. Strength is knowing when to walk away without explaining yourself. Dignity is choosing yourself, even when it costs you everything. And love, real love, never asks you to disappear. As my life continued to settle into something peaceful and solid, I began to see my past differently, not as a curse, but as a brutal teacher. That night didn't ruin me, it redirected me. It stripped me of illusions I would have carried for a lifetime if they hadn't been shattered all at once. I didn't lose a husband. I didn't lose a best friend. I lost lies. And losing lies is painful but necessary. I kept a small box tucked away in my home. Inside it were remnants of that day that once defined everything. A dried flower from my bouquet, a photograph I never framed, a piece of fabric from the dress I wore when my life split in two. I didn't keep that box to torture myself. I kept it to remember how far I had come, to honor the woman who didn't survive that night, but transformed because of it. She didn't die weak. She died brave, even if she didn't know it at the time. Sometimes I would open that box and feel nothing but gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it brought. Daniel once asked me, gently, why I kept it. I told him it reminded me that I never wanted to be loved at the cost of myself again. He didn't question it. He understood that healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it means integrating the past without letting it control you. With him, I didn't feel like I had to perform happiness. I didn't need to explain my boundaries or justify my caution. He respected my pace, my silence, my independence. And that respect was the foundation of everything we built. I used to believe a happy ending meant being chosen. Now I know it means choosing yourself first. Life didn't magically become free of challenges. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt, times when old fears tried to resurface. But now I met those moments with awareness instead of panic, with confidence instead of desperation. I trusted myself. That trust was the real victory. People sometimes expect a dramatic conclusion to stories like mine, a confrontation, a revenge arc, some grand moment where everyone sees the truth and justice is served in a satisfying way. But real life isn't a movie. The most powerful endings happen quietly, when you stop needing closure from people who couldn't give it, when you stop replaying conversations that will never change, when you stop waiting for apologies that will never come. Closure is something you give yourself. I didn't need Julian to admit anything else. I didn't need Laura to understand what she lost. I didn't need the world to validate my pain. I already had everything I needed. And when I finally understood that, the past lost its grip completely. Today, when I look back on my life, I don't see a woman who was betrayed. I see a woman who was awakened. The pain didn't disappear overnight, and it didn't politely leave when I asked it to, but it changed shape. It stopped being something that hurt me and became something that strengthened me. I'm still with Daniel, not because I need him, not because he fills a void, but because we choose each other every day, without fear, without games, without conditions. We built a life that feels steady, honest, real. A life where love isn't loud or performative, but present. Where respect is not negotiated. Where silence is comfortable. And words are never used as weapons. Some evenings, we sit together on the terrace of our home as the sun begins to set. I drink tea. He reads a book. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't. And in those moments, I feel something I once thought was impossible. Peace. Not excitement that keeps you awake at night, not passion that burns and consumes, but peace that lets you rest, breathe, and exist exactly as you are. People still ask me if I would ever trust again after what happened. I always smile when they ask that, because the truth is, I didn't just trust again, I learned how to trust better. I learned how to listen to discomfort instead of silencing it, how to walk away at the first sign of disrespect instead of waiting for proof. I learned that loyalty doesn't need to be tested to be real, that love doesn't demand sacrifices that erase you, and that anyone who truly loves you will never ask you to become smaller. I never ran into Julian or Laura again, not because I avoided them, but because they no longer existed in my world. They didn't deserve forgiveness or hatred from me. They deserved indifference. And indifference is what they received, not as punishment, but as consequence. Sometimes, when I walk alone through my neighborhood, I pass storefront windows and catch my reflection. I no longer look into my own eyes searching for validation, approval, or love. I look to recognize myself. And there I am. With scars, yes, but also with a strength I once mistook for weakness, with clarity I could only earn through pain, with a calm that no one can take from me. I still keep that box of memories, the dried flowers, the photographs, the remnants of a life that ended so another could begin. I don't open it often, but when I do, I don't feel sadness. I feel respect. Respect for the woman I was, and pride in the woman I became. That night didn't break me. It rebuilt me. I learned that pain doesn't destroy you unless you let it define you. And betrayal, as devastating as it is, doesn't get the final word. You do. The way you rise, the way you choose yourself, the way you refuse to carry shame that was never yours to begin with. This is not a story of revenge. It's a story of dignity. Because my happy ending didn't come from finding the perfect man or proving anything to anyone. It came from becoming whole on my own terms, from knowing that I am enough, without begging, without waiting, without shrinking. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this. Don't stay where you're not respected. Don't confuse love with endurance. And never abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. The strongest love you will ever experience is the one you build with yourself. Everything else that comes after should only add to it, never replace it. If you ever thought true love wasn't meant for you, let me tell you something. It doesn't arrive when you're desperate or afraid to be alone. It comes when you finally choose yourself and refuse to accept less than you deserve. That's when life meets you halfway. Thank you for listening to my story. With love, strength, and respect.